Don't you hate it when your Fire Emblem game doesn't have Fire Emblem in it? It's more likely than you think. Because despite it literally being the name of the franchise, the story role of the titular Fire Emblem differs greatly. Sometimes it's worthy of carrying a game's title, other times it feels like Intelligent Systems realized last minute they needed to call something the Fire Emblem. And so it has been all kind of things, ranging from a musical performance to a literal dude. And not once has it actually been an emblem. Like I would imagine many of you, unless I have some nearly 40-year-old Japanese viewers, in which case, apologies, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light was not my first Fire Emblem game, and I distinctively remember going back to the Arcania titles and being a bit underwhelmed to find out the first titular Fire Emblem, the one the series got its name and entire identity from, is a big, kinda clunky looking shield. From now on referred to as the Binding Shield, to set it apart from the rest, this item is basically the magical MacGuffin of the Arcania games, being crafted by the goddess Naga to protect humanity from the Earth Dragons. In its very first appearance all the way back on the NES, it was exclusively a story-relevant item with zero gameplay purpose, but starting with Mystery of the Emblem, it became something to put in Marth's inventory, after which it raises his stats and allows him to open chests without a key. It's never really explained how that works, but maybe Marth just rams his shield against it until he forces it open. I don't know. The Fire Emblem has room for 5 orbs, which must be collected in order for it to harness its true power. While the orbs themselves, the Geosphere, Dark Sphere, Star Sphere, Light Sphere and Life Sphere, have been kept consistent all this time, the exact coloration of them has switched on occasion, with for example the Geo and Star Sphere switching colors in some games. Funnily enough, in the original game, the shield, when stripped of its orbs and powers, is actually referred to as the Fire Emblem, before then using the name Binding Shield when it is all powered up, meaning that this entire franchise is actually named after a powerless, yet to be upgraded shield. This has since been rectified though, because since Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the Emblem are not the only games set in the world of Arcania, the first ever Fire Emblem has returned in other games. Its most prominent return is in Awakening, where Chrom is now entrusted with the same shield Marth used, although he too has to go collect these orbs again. However, this time the shield is referred to as Fire Emblem, even in its naked form. It is also actually not a usable inventory item here, possibly because Chrom is too dignified to ram the shield into a chest until it opens. The second game in the series was Fire Emblem Gaiden, and as a true Gaiden game, meaning side story, this game doesn't feature the Fire Emblem at all. However, due to the fact Valentia is right next door from Arcania, that actually kinda makes sense in this context, since if it were to return, it would have to be in the form of the Binding Shield again. But still, the fact it doesn't return makes Gaiden and Shadows of Valentia at that the only Fire Emblem game which does not feature a Fire Emblem at all. It should be pointed out though that Shadows of Valentia does feature an item called the Star Jacinth, which is strongly implied to be the Star Sphere orb that fits in the Binding Shield. Its name is slightly different in both Japanese and English, but the effects are nearly identical and the sprite resembles it as well, so the idea is probably that the characters that find it don't realize they've actually found the Star Sphere. And for what it's worth, other European languages like French and Spanish call both by the exact same name. Seeing as the adventures of Sigurd, Seliph and Leif are also set in the same world as the Arcania tales, it would stand to reason that the Binding Shield is also Jugdral's version of the Fire Emblem, but it is a little unclear whether that is the case. You see, at the end of Genealogy of the Holy War, it is said that the crest of Velthomer is also known as the Fire Emblem, or in Japanese, the Hono no Monshu, which is not the same thing as the series' name. That's actually just a Japanese phonetic pronunciation of the English word Fire Emblem. Seeing as Hono no Monshu translates literally to Emblem of Flames, I think it is clear what was being referenced here regardless though, especially since this would later become the main phrase to refer to the Fire Emblem as an in-game concept. However, it should also be pointed out that the way this phrase is used in the ending is definitely different from how most games incorporate the Fire Emblem. It appears to be less of an actual thing of legend, something that really holds significant power, and rather a nickname of sorts. A mark of justice, as it is described, in which case the nickname may be more derived from the actual powerful Fire Emblem, and the idea isn't that the crest of Velthomer really has any significant powers. It's like calling a big guy a tank. He doesn't actually have a rocket launcher for an arm, he has the same characteristics as a tank. Same thing here. But when we arrive at the two Alib games, we have officially cut ties with the Arcanian world, meaning that we are free from the Binding Shield and the idea of the Fire Emblem is allowed to take a new form. I think it's fair to say that in this title it was a low priority for the developers, although I suppose you could make the argument that an important Fire Emblem has literally never been a priority outside of the Arcania games and Awakening. That said, the function of the Fire Emblem in the Binding and Blazing Blade is nearly identical to what it was in Arcania. It was used alongside a sword to seal the evil dragons away. But in Arcania, this was done alongside Falchion using a binding shield, and here it was done alongside a binding blade and a seal known as the Imperial Seal of Burn. Now, in the games, this seal is never actually seen. We don't know if it's the kind of seal you would use on a letter or some sort of spell, it could even be an adorable marine animal. We can't rule it out. Based on the games, at least. Side material does show depictions of this seal, and seeing as they are consistent and have appeared in official Intelligent Systems made content, I think it's fair to say they are correct. Meaning that this is what the Imperial Seal of Burn, a Leap's Fire Emblem, looks like, as shown in the Binding Blade manga, which is not IS made, but also Fire Emblem Cypher, which is. It appears the seal is actually sort of gem, with flaming effects as you might expect from something called the Fire Emblem. In the Sacred Stones, the Fire Emblem is once again used as a method to seal evil, which in this case means the Demon King and not a dragon, showing IS dare to take a risk here. Even though 5 Sacred Stones exist, Grados is a little more special than the rest, for that is the one containing Mortis, as well as being the item referred to as the Fire Emblem. Prior to the game's events, Leon split the Fire Emblem in half, creating the Sacred Stone, which is then swiftly destroyed, and the Dark Stone, which is the part that contains Mortis and is the object fueling the entire game's plot. As such, you could say half of the Fire Emblem is not only very important to the story of the game, but also the first time the Fire Emblem is not actually a good thing, and is that the main power source of the villain. It marks a change in how the Fire Emblem is being used within the story, becoming more of a wink wink little reference rather than an actual object that needs to be named and called out. But if the Fire Emblem is a Sacred Stone, does that then mean the title of the game is actually Fire Emblem The Fire Emblems? Anyway, when we move on to Tellius, we find a purpose for the Fire Emblem that is remarkably similar to what we saw in the Sacred Stones, except now it's in heroic hands rather than the villains. Laurent's medallion serves as a seal imprisoning the goddess Yune, preventing her from spreading chaos. The artifact is said to flicker like a flame, granting it the nickname Fire Emblem. Unlike the past few games, this version does actually appear in-game, meaning that we can confirm that, well, it's a medallion, what did you expect? Once again though, the association with the Fire Emblem is far from heroic and just, as it was during the early games. The influence of Laurent's medallion is corrupting and drives many mad, and although that isn't directly caused by the object, rather who is stored inside it, it is still now back to back that you could consider the Fire Emblem as an object a net negative. I will say though, this is probably the biggest story impact the item has had since the series started really. It is a big part of the lore, history and plot of both Tellius games. Since we already tackled Awakening, we move right on to Fates, where after 25 years of being some boring story item, the Fire Emblem is finally a cool, badass sword. Corrin's signature weapon Yato fulfills the role this time, and there is something funny going on here depending on the form it has. In its Shadow and Blazing forms, Yato is referred to as Seal of Flames, which is actually the correct translation for what the Fire Emblem is always referred to in universe. If you take that as a fun reference, it's kinda cool. If you take that as an effort to hide that Yato is actually the Fire Emblem, then yeah, it sucks. Same thing happened in the Japanese version of Awakening, by the way. The Fire Emblem is originally referred to as the Pedestal of Flames, as if that is in any way, shape or form subtle. Anyway, in Revelation only, Yato can access the power of all 4 defined weapons to become the Omega Yato, which is referred to as the Fire Emblem, fully and properly this time. If you were hoping for a lore explanation on how this works or why this weapon of all of them is the Fire Emblem, I would suggest playing a different game, unfortunately. Let this serve as your reminder that the fact Corrin even obtained Yato in the first place was a complete coincidence. If the attempt on Makoto's life would have happened anywhere else, Yato may have never been uncovered. Next in line we have Three Houses, which goes all in on the wink wink yes this is the Fire Emblem but we don't call it that train, by introducing the Crest of Flames, the crest born from the goddess Sophis, but also found in Byleth and even Edelgard. If any preconceived notions of what the Fire Emblem is or should be were still a thing, this is the game that really shakes them off, as the Crest of Flames essentially has nothing in common with the Fire Emblems of the past, save for the sole elements of being very plot relevant and powerful in universe. I mean, it's not even a physical thing, it's more so a bloodline of sorts, the hereditary power of the progenitor goddess, kinda like the Crystal Valfomer, except it's not a nickname, it's real. It should be pointed out though that while the English name keeps it ever so slightly vague, to the point I could kinda see people missing it, keeping in mind that the word crest is thrown around a lot in Fodlan and so loses its Fire Emblem specific meaning, the Japanese term for the Crest of Flames is actually straight up Hono no Monsho, i.e. the Japanese word for the in-game Fire Emblem. Nothing subtle about it. Funnily enough, while this does make Fodlan the first continent in the series ever to not have a so-called Fire Emblem, this is actually the first game you could say has an actual Fire Emblem, because the Crest of Flames is used as the symbol of the Resistance Army, therefore making it an emblem. A Fire Emblem. Get it? While I can imagine the Crest of Flames may have been missable for some players, there is no possible way you miss the Fire Emblem in Engage. It's you. Look in the mirror and you see the Fire Emblem. Yes, after Alir dies, he is resurrected by the other emblems to become the 13th one, referred to as the Connector or the final emblem, the Fire Emblem. Roll credits. I constantly go back and forth on whether I like this moment or not. It's kinda cool, and it's kinda... I'm rolling my eyes right now, you can't see that. In the end, I think this is the kind of thing I'll allow on the basis that this is an anniversary title, and in that light having the main character be the Fire Emblem that connects the whole series together is kind of fitting. But in any other game in the series, this would have been less than ideal. Similarly to Fates, there is really not a lot to say about this one unfortunately, wild as it is, simply because the whole concept of the emblems is really underexplained in the game, and from what we can tell, the Fire Emblem wasn't a pre-existing concept. It just came into existence when Alir became an emblem. Now, that is all main series games up until this point, but the concept of a Fire Emblem has also followed the series into several spin-offs. Easily the most boring is the inclusion in Fire Emblem Warriors. This is basically just the Binding Shield again, except now renamed the Shield of Flames, although its design is identical and it once again requires orbs to be powered up, called Gleam Stones, that are derived from the power of heroes. Just like many Fire Emblems before, the Shield of Flames was also used as a seal and contained the game's main villain, the Chaos Dragon Velazark. Yeah, like I said, it's not too interesting. On the other end of the spectrum though, we have Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which may not literally bear the Fire Emblem title, but does contain the concept of it, all in the form of a theater performance. The Opera of Light has the power to summon the Divine Dragon if it is performed by the correct heroes, and the lead actor has support from the hero King Marth. Duh. Only then can the opera unleash its true power, which functions as the game's Fire Emblem equivalent, complete with a song that is a remix of the Fire Emblem main theme. I mean, I can only applaud Atlus for finding a way to include a Fire Emblem in a game about idols. That was definitely not a given. And lastly, we have one more Fire Emblem game, which could be the first game in the entire series to not feature an actual Fire Emblem in its world at all. Or it is another of the most unique applications, depending on who you'd ask. While it is never outright confirmed within the game, it is very strongly implied that Breidablik is Hero's equivalent to the Fire Emblem, seeing as it is essential to how the game functions, it is what makes the summoner so coveted and vital, and it is referred to with terms similar to what the Fire Emblem has been called in the past, although any truly confirming phrases are never used. But if this is the Fire Emblem, then that means it has now also taken on the role of a gun. A gun that turns orbs into portals to summon Fire Emblem characters from all across the realms, complete with imagery that clearly invokes similarities to the Binding Shield. Then again, with Hero's dialogue writing, you would think that by now, a reference to it being the Fire Emblem would have been ham-fisted in, right? The fact that hasn't happened can definitely be seen as evidence to the contrary. In which case, Heroes joins its little brother Shadows in being Fire Emblem games without a Fire Emblem. At least until Shadows finally introduces an Alir that can transform into a seal. What is your favorite version of the Fire Emblem? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. If you really want to support me, you can now become a channel member to get all kinds of fun perks and help me keep bringing these videos to your doorstep every week. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.